glanced at the doors of the mansion. Coop, Jane, and Eli moved to help Leslie and Caroline retrieve Helen from the trunk of the Beetle. And slowly, the 8 subjects of the Weaver's latest octagon retired to the fleeting safety of Loomridge Haven. Leslie sat on the cold wood floor of Zachariah's shrine room beside her mother Helen. The adults were arguing, but Leslie was distracted by the flickering of the candles. The room itself felt alive. The glow of the candles seemed to inhale and exhale, and the surrounding religious and spiritual artifacts and icons vibrated with the pulse of organic life. Leslie was mesmerized, but also a bit frightened by the room. She clutched Helen's hand for comfort. Her mother's bones felt delicate beneath the skin, though the mansion's spirit was starting to counteract it. Old Sam's dark magic had truly wrecked Helen. Her body, mind, and spirit were brittle. Her grip was weak. Even so, the comfort of her mother's hand in her own was enough to ground Leslie in this strange place. The room was cluttered with all sorts of unusual relics, shelf after shelf lined with Zachariah Loomridge's collection. Curious objects and tools with strange etchings surrounded Leslie, and they, too, felt alive. They seemed to be watching her. She knew each of these objects held a story, that they had been spiritually important to a person or people somewhere in the world at some point in time. She looked at her mother, sitting beside her with the warmth just barely returning to her tired eyes, and wondered what exactly was in store for their strange crew. She looked up at the group that had assembled: Jane, Coop, Willie, Ivy, the 2 Loomridge brothers, Joseph and Lydia Loomridge, Leslie, and her mother and Aunt Caroline, all clustered in Zachariah's old assembly room for religious rituals and the pursuit of magical thinking. Everyone's face looked different in the dim glow of the candlelight. It felt as though a single thread had been stuck through each of them, frayed but somehow growing stronger nonetheless, as they were all held together by an inescapable bond. Leslie tried again to tune herself into the conversation. The tone was still a bit aggressive for her taste, but she figured it might be important to hear what was being discussed. Jane was reprimanding Coop and the others for their recklessness the night before. "Good Lord, I only hope that's enough sneaking around behind each other's backs for everyone." Her eyes were even sharper than her tone. As soon as Leslie tuned back into the discussion, Jane noticed that she was listening and glanced over at Leslie. Leslie didn't intend to make Jane feel ashamed for her anger. After all, she had watched a friend of hers die a gruesome death the night before over the group's mistake. But Leslie wanted the arguing to be done with, and she didn't know how to hide it from her eyes. Jane seemed to notice this, and she softened up after that. With a new, more settled tone, Jane said, "This octagon will only hold if we can establish trust between us." Leslie saw Willie and Ivy shifting, Ivy glancing to the side. Coop's face was stoic, but Leslie thought his eyes were red around the edges with a concealed guilty feeling. Caroline's expression was unreadable. Leslie's aunt had a badass poker face. Jane's voice dropped, almost tender now. "Look, what's done is done. Magdalena's gone now. She gave her life for this chance to stop old Sam once and for all. We had to stand as one. We have to work together. No more secrets or lies, and no more fighting. That goes for me too. I'm sorry I've been so hard on you all." Leslie felt a flicker of hope as she glanced around the room. Most of them held Jane's words in a quiet kind of acceptance. They were haunted, sure. All of them were haunted. Already they had seen things that had changed them forever. But the events of that evening seemed to have united them somehow. At least, most of them. Joseph. Loomridge's harsh laughter cut through the room as he stepped forward, an amused grin pointing at his lips as he stared at Jane. Are you finished playing leader of the fucking pack now, Jane? What? Is the sewer rat enjoying her little taste of power? His voice echoed off the stone walls. You've been looking forward to this day, haven't you, Jane? You like being the one with all the answers, don't you? The center of attention? Leslie's stomach dropped. Joseph's tone filled her with disgust. She glanced at Jane, who almost chuckled in disbelief. You've been on the sidelines, Jane, waiting for this moment. Lydia Loomridge added, her voice as icy as her husband's. She crossed her arms and leveled a stare at Jane. You've always wanted to take control here at the Loomridge house, haven't you? A little groupie for Zachariah's movement, clawing her way to the top. She smiled darkly. It's pathetic to watch. Babysitter Jane. Leslie felt sick. She could see the fury rising up in Jane's eyes, the fury she had just gotten under control. The cracks in her composure were beginning to widen again. Leslie wished desperately for Joseph and Lydia to shut up, but they didn't seem to care about everything at stake. Their eyes were a matching set of sinister, self-satisfied embers that watched gleefully as Jane struggled to keep her calm. Then, an unexpected voice entered the discourse. She's done more to earn her place here than either of you. It was Josiah, his voice steady as he stepped forward. Leslie could hardly believe her ears. Josiah was the last person she would have expected to speak up like this, especially to fly against his parents. His gaze was fierce as he looked at his mother and father, and his jaw was clenched. What have you two ever done with your stupid little lives? What have you ever done to help anybody else? You're so goddamn self-righteous, but all you do is play the system for your own fucking comfort and security. Jane spent her whole life in this town keeping watch, so the people in it would be safe if history ever managed to repeat itself. Lydia's eyes lit up with surprise. Josiah? She gasped. He's right, Eli said, his voice lower but no less resolute as he moved to join his brother. Leslie's spirit rose as she watched the two brothers, who couldn't be more different from one another, standing against their parents. It was a rare sight to see them on the same page. Eli continued. You're so busy worrying about your precious reputations to ever think about doing something for someone else's sake. Well, it makes you pretty goddamn insufferable. Haven't you ever wondered why your sad attempts at popularity never quite fix the loneliness you both feel? The real reason you hate people like Jane is because you know they're better people than you could ever hope to be. Leslie stole a glance at Jane, whose face was wide with a dumbfounded gratitude. She looked from Josiah to Eli, and the smile tugging at her lips was paired with watery eyes. Jane could see it too. It was a big deal for these two to be uniting about anything, much less to defy Mom and Dad. You do realize that our lives are on the line, don't you? Josiah said directly to his father this time, his tone calm but unwavering. Maybe if you took a second to actually listen, you'd realize that you're gambling your sons. Eli nodded and spoke directly to Joseph as well. Whatever brought us together is connected to this mansion, and it's connected to what your father was trying to do here. So if you're so bothered by this, by Jane's being here, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here, not her. For a moment, it looked like Joseph would back down, but then he scoffed at Jane and muttered, "Little whore." After a moment of silence, Jane erupted with laughter and glanced over at Eli. He started laughing too. Eli grinned widely and glanced over at his father. "Your son's whore, Pop," he chuckled, before winking at Jane. She winked right back, then shrugged at Joseph and Lydia. Helen tightened her grip on Leslie's hand. Leslie rolled her eyes. Her mother's inner prude was showing. Lydia Loomridge gasped melodramatically. Ivy stifled a laugh. Joseph tore silently into Eli with fiery eyes before glaring at Jane. "What did you say?" he whispered. "I finally lost it, Daddy-o. Your little boy's a man now." Josiah's jaw was wide and he locked eyes with Leslie for a moment. He was unable to hide his amusement. "How dare you stoop so low?" Joseph said with a raised voice. "Please," Jane blurted, "like father, like son, and he gave me a better time than you ever did, I'll tell you that much." Joseph froze like a statue. "Liar," Lydia screamed. But then she glanced over at her husband and his stone-cold expression, and she knew as well as anyone else in the room that Jane was telling the truth. After a moment, the room erupted into a screaming match between Eli, Jane, Joseph, and Lydia. Helen's hand broke away from Leslie's. She was transfixed. But Leslie hated all the fighting. Then across the room, she caught Caroline's gaze. Caroline's face was calm, her expression a resigned with silent understanding. She could read Leslie, and she knew Leslie was sick of all the conflict. With a subtle nod, she gestured toward the door, her eyes flicking back to Leslie's with a clear message, "Let's go." Amid the chaos, Caroline and Leslie easily slipped out unnoticed and wandered together through the twisting corridors of Loomridge Haven. Each turn led them further from the noise and chaos of the shrine room. Neither had to say a word. They both knew how the other felt. They were both silently excited to have another member of the family, to have each other, and to get to know each other. They entered the servants' quarters, the mansion's quieter, tucked-away wing where the Octagon had been staying. Leslie could finally breathe here, away from her mother's fragile state, away from the hostility and the exhausting drama of the so-called grown-ups. Caroline opened the door to a small, private room where she and the others had been sleeping. They approached a plain twin-sized bed with a small bedside table, on top of which was a fluttering lamp. As soon as Leslie and Caroline arrived at their destination, the heaviness Leslie had been carrying was released. She sank to the edge of the bed, rubbing her hands together to fight off the chilliness of the old estate. Caroline sat beside her, close but not crowding. "Thought you might need a break," she said, reaching into the drawer of her bedside table. "I've got something that might help, actually." She pulled out a crinkled chocolate bar, its wrapper slightly torn. "Eli gave this to me last night to celebrate getting out of the hospital. It's a fancy, expensive brand. He said it was for, making it through. But I thought maybe you and I could share it." Leslie blinked with surprise. "Chocolate? He gave you a chocolate bar to celebrate getting out of?" Her voice trailed off, but Caroline's smile was wry. "Yeah, a single chocolate bar for making it out of the psych ward. He's a weirdo." Caroline tore open the wrapper and broke the bar in half. She giggled, turning to Leslie. "It's the finest you survived chocolate in town, but we've both had to be survivors lately, haven't we?" Leslie couldn't help it. She giggled too, a quiet sound that almost embarrassed her in the silence. "Bet your ass." Caroline handed half of the chocolate bar over to Leslie. "After all this bullshit, you looked like you could use a pick-me-up. And if you're anything like your mom and I were at your age, chocolate is the way to go." Leslie held the chocolate, feeling its edges begin to melt onto her fingertips. "The answer to life's greatest challenges is typically a bar of chocolate," Caroline added. Leslie grinned and took a bite. The dark, slightly bitter sweetness melted in her mouth. All at once, she was suddenly at peace. She had always been that way when it came to chocolate. Was that really a thing she got from her mom? Something she shared with Aunt Caroline? "Thanks," she murmured, glancing at Caroline, who was nibbling on her own piece. They shared the pleasant experience in silence for a minute or two. After a bit, Caroline was the first to break the silence, her voice low. "You know, I'm glad I'm here with you. I've wanted to be for so long." "Really?" Leslie asked bluntly. Yup, there was. A lot I had to take care of to get to you. She looked down at the chocolate in her hand, but her eyes were distant. I spent years fighting for this. Leslie looked at her, caught off guard. Fighting? Caroline's gaze was sharp, as though she were seeing the memories flash by in her mind. Yes, I've always known I was meant to have a place in your life, and every time I got close, something stood in the way. She paused. Leslie could hear the frustration and pain behind her aunt's words. There are people who think they know what is best for you in this life. When I was a kid, I thought that was something that would go away when I got older. But it doesn't. They want you to have a safe, clean life. And, well, life isn't really like that. I know, Leslie said. I'm not scaring you, am I? I know some adults try to hide this kind of shit from kids. Sorry, I should watch my language. Caroline tensed up. I'm 12. Everyone my age swears, Leslie said reassuringly. Right, Caroline grinned. You're like me, aren't you? No bullshit. No bullshit, Leslie repeated. But what were you saying about people thinking they know best? Right, Caroline went on. The point I'm trying to get to is, you have to fight in this life for the right to do your thing. Just to be you, it's stupid. And everyone feels that way. So you'd think we would stop going so hard on each other. But we don't. We keep it going. Then we all want everyone else to ease up on us. Like we all think we're special or something. We all think we should get a better deal than everyone else, Leslie added. Exactly, Caroline agreed. But what I'm trying to say is, there's nothing wrong with fighting for your right to just be. And it's up to you if that's something you want. Leslie was quiet, absorbing the words. That's why we need to be there for each other, she said after a moment. Caroline nodded. That's right, kid, she said, finishing off her bar of chocolate. We all have to fight for ourselves, to make our own way, and that's a path we walk alone. But we need to stand by each other, support each other, love each other, and that's something we can't do alone, and shouldn't do alone. Caroline's voice filled up with tears. And you won't have to, Leslie. I'm here now. I got to you. I finally got to you. Leslie wrapped her aunt in a tight squeeze. We'll be okay now, she said. Damn right, Caroline whispered fiercely. I'll be there for you whenever you need me. No bullshit. No bullshit, Leslie agreed. Late that night, Leslie drifted awake. Her eyes blinked open to the faint glow of the hallway seeping under the door of the bedroom in the servants' quarters. She lay still, feeling the familiar warmth of her mother beside her in the bed they were sharing. She glanced around in the dark. Ivy and Caroline were asleep in the beds to her left, Jane was asleep in the bed to her right, and across the room, Coop and Willie slept. Willie was snoring faintly, and Helen's breathing was soft and steady beside her. She closed her eyes, hoping to slip back into sleep, but a sound, a soft voice, seemed to pull at her from somewhere beyond the door. Leslie. The whisper was faint, like it was brushing against her ear yet coming from somewhere far away. She opened her eyes fully, her pulse quickening. Had she imagined it? It did sound a bit like the wind. She listened, holding her breath, and heard it again. Leslie, her name carried through the silence with a gentle sort of urgency. It reminded her a bit of old Sam's beckoning from the night before, as she had been locked up in the attic. But this didn't sound like old Sam at all. Should she ignore it? Should she wake the others? Leslie couldn't escape the feeling that whatever this voice wanted from her, it was important. She was afraid, sure, but also curious. Without another thought, Leslie carefully slipped out of bed, her feet touching the cold floor as she pulled herself upright. Her mother's hand twitched, but she didn't wake. Leslie stood still for a moment, hesitant. Then, the soft sound of her name drifted down the hall again, drawing her forward. Leslie quiet as a shadow. Leslie slipped through the door and into the narrow hallway. The voice was leading her. A quiet lure in the mansion's heavy silence, the old wood creaking softly beneath her bare feet. She moved toward the faint glow coming from a small window at the end of the corridor, gasping as she caught sight of something moving outside. In the yard, a figure stood alone, her shape soft in the moonlight, framed against the dark trees beyond. Leslie stepped closer, squinting through the dusty glass. It was Emily. Emily stood in the grass, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face turned up slightly as though she could see Leslie watching. Her expression was soft but intent, her hand raised just slightly, fingers beckoning Leslie forward. She seemed ghostly in the dim light, familiar and strange. Leslie pressed her hand to the cold glass, her pulse racing as she watched Emily's figure hovering in the shadows. Waiting, Leslie took a breath. Hesitantly, she cracked open the window. "Thank God you came." Emily's voice rose from the darkness below. It was unnaturally clear, as if spoken directly into Leslie's ears. It carried no warmth, it hardly sounded human, and possessed a hollow, eerie cadence. Leslie leaned out the window. "Emily," she called. Emily stood in the yard, her clammy face upturned and slack, her eyes dull like tinted glass. Are you okay?" Emily's lips curled into a faint, crooked frown. "No, old Sam got me," she said, her voice almost sing-song, the words dragging like nails on a chalkboard. Leslie froze, a shiver racing up her spine. "What are you talking about? What do you mean he got you?" Emily tilted her head with a sharp, unnatural motion. Her neck popped like dry twigs. "He took me away," she said, her tone flat and dark. "Dragged me from the street the other night, whispered things in the dark, made me into his toy." Her vacant gaze sharpened suddenly, locking on Leslie. "And it's all because of you, me?" Leslie croaked. "You sent him after me," Emily said, her voice rising, trembling with something like laughter or sobs. It was impossible to tell. "You asked him to make me stop, to make me go away. So he did." Her lips twisted into a grimace and her teeth were bared like an animal. "And now there's nowhere left for me to go, nowhere except here." "I didn't mean to," Leslie started. Emily interrupted her with a shrill chuckle. "It's funny, you know," she said, her head tilting the other way, jerking like a marionette. "I thought I had all the power. I thought being mean to you was just part of middle school, something harmless, something I'd forget by summer." But now her smile melted into a trembling frown again. "Now I know what it feels like. What you felt. He's shown me, Leslie. He's shown me what it's like to be the one who gets bullied. And it's worse than I knew." Leslie stepped back from the window, shaking her head. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know this would happen. I don't need your apologies." Emily's voice dropped to a low grumble. "I need your help. He's eating me alive, Leslie. Piece by piece, my body's still here, but my soul." She reached out with trembling hands. Her fingers were long and claw-like, almost reminding Leslie of old Sam's hands. "My soul's slipping away." Leslie clutched the windowsill. She could feel her heartbeat pounding through her whole body. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "Let me in," Emily said with sudden desperation. "The mansion will protect me. It's the only place he can't follow. But the mansion, it knows better. It won't let me come in on my own. Not like this." Emily paused before continuing. "Old Sam's got his spirit inside me. His hold on me would dissipate inside Loomridge Haven, but the mansion won't let me come through the doors or sneak through the windows. Not unless someone inside invites me." Emily stepped closer. "Please, Leslie, please let me in." Leslie's stomach turned. A deep, primal instinct within her screamed at her to close the window and run. But Emily's desperate voice kept her there. "I'm begging you," Emily said, her tone trembling and cracking. I don't want to die out here. I don't want to disappear. Her hands pressed to her face, fingers digging into her skin. I can feel him pulling me apart, Leslie. Please, just open the fucking door for me. Leslie hesitated. Something was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. But Emily's cries dug into her, each one more frantic, more raw. Please. Emily wailed, her voice rising into a shrieking moan. Let me in. Don't leave me out here with him. Leslie stepped back from the window, trembling, unable to move, unable to decide. Emily's shadow stretched out on the ground below, rippling unnaturally as her sobs twisted into a low, guttural growl. Please, Leslie. Please, Leslie. Please. Caroline woke, her heart already pounding, snapping from sleep to terror in an instant. The screams were raw and ragged, echoing through the servants' quarters, shredding the silence that had held them so tightly just moments before. She knew that scream well. It was her sister's. It was Helen's. Where was she? And where was Leslie? The others were stirring, also awakened by the noise. Caroline glanced around to see Ivy sitting up abruptly. Jane's face was set in a grim, determined expression. Willie and Coop exchanged a tense look. They all followed Caroline into the hallway, the air thick with dread. Their footsteps fell in a strange, unified rhythm, each of them caught up in the same uneasy drive. Helen, Caroline called, her voice carrying through the narrow corridor as they broke into a run. She led the way, her pulse pounding, her mind racing. They reached the end of the hall and ran into Eli and Josiah. It's her husband, Josiah muttered with urgency. Robert? Ivy asked. His body. It's been led inside. Eli said. Somebody must have invited him in. Jane said, there's no other way Loomridge Haven would have allowed one of Samuel's puppets through its doors. A grim realization settled over Caroline. Her brother-in-law was dead and his reanimated corpse was there, tormenting her sister, and possibly her niece. Ivy's hand touched Caroline's shoulder, and they both nodded silently, before Caroline led the group forward. They found Helen at the bottom of a staircase, her figure half illuminated by the dim light of a sconce on the wall. She was wrapped in the embrace of a figure which, though standing on its own 2 feet, was undeniably a corpse. Robert's corpse. His skin hung slack and pallid, his eyes clouded and empty as a shell. He and Helen were arm in arm, and though his body was standing on its own, it was very clearly dead. Lydia and Joseph Loomridge stood several feet in front of Robert's body at the bottom of the stairs, frozen in shocked silence. Oh, Caroline, he's back, Helen sobbed, her voice trembling as she caressed Robert's chest. It's a miracle. He was like a zombie when he beckoned me to let him in. But now look at him. He's alive. We're dancing. Caroline felt her stomach turn as she exchanged a horrified glance with the others. Eli and Jane clutched onto each other, as though one of them might collapse without the other's support. Willie took Caroline's hand, a gesture for which she was grateful. Robert's dead, foggy eyes stared unfocused at the space beyond Helen's shoulder. Whatever animation had come over him when he entered had begun to fade, and was now doing little more than keeping him from collapsing to the floor. But Helen was oblivious to this, desperately clinging to the delusion that her husband was back, and that he was going to be okay. Led by Caroline, they crept down the stairs, joining the Loomridge couple across from the sight of the delusional Helen as she waltzed pathetically across the foyer with the body of her late husband. His back began to arch and his arms drooped toward the floor as Helen carried on. It was as if the spell was continuing to wear off. For a moment, it appeared as though they were dancing an odd sort of tango, and Robert was the partner who was being dipped. Caroline kept her focus on Helen, nearly petrified by the look of strained relief on her sister's face. Helen, Caroline said at the front of the uneasy huddle. She tried to keep her voice calm, and suddenly noticed her throat was dry. "Come toward us, okay? Step away from him, now. You need to let him go." Helen clutched Robert's corpse tighter, her eyes flashing with defiance. "No, Caroline," Helen snapped sharply and defensively. "He's here. He's back. Robert's with me again. We're together." Helen's expression softened, the fierce glint in her eyes fading as she looked down at Robert's body, which was sagging deeper and deeper in her arm. The reality of it seemed to dawn on her as he grew heavier in her grasp. Her fingers began to loosen slightly as the corpse's head fell back, and its glossy, lifeless eyes rolled up like ping-pong balls floating on the water. Helen glanced over at Caroline. Her lip trembled. He's not really, no. No, he's not," Caroline said softly, extending her hand. "Let him go, now, Helen." Helen choked out a sob, releasing Robert's corpse. It dangled impossibly with its back arched, as if her arm were still supporting the weight, holding the body in a dramatic dip. She stumbled into Caroline's arms, clinging to her tightly as her sobs tore through the air, raw and anguished. Caroline held Helen close, stroking her hair. Over Helen's shoulder, Caroline watched as Robert's corpse crumpled, folding onto itself. The last thread of animation had been severed. Whatever had breathed life back into him was gone, his body lying still, an empty vessel drained of its purpose. I know, Caroline whispered as Helen cried. "Now where's Leslie?" Helen jerked her tear-soaked face back at these words and looked into Caroline's eyes with a puzzled expression. "Leslie?" she murmured. But before anyone could say anything else, a faint sound echoed through the hall. It had an eerie, almost musical quality. A soft murmur, delicate but unmistakable. It was the sound of voices, two young girls' voices, hushed but loud enough for their strange conversation to echo remnants of sound through the mansion's hallways. Eli's gaze snapped toward the corridor from which the sound had pooled into the foyer. "The wine cellar," he whispered, his voice thick with dread. "The voices are coming from the wine cellar." Caroline felt goosebumps forming all over her skin as a bundle of terror settled in her gut. She looked at Helen. Her sister's tear-streaked face was pressed against her shoulder. She looked over at Jane, at Coop, and Eli. They were all mortified. She knew she'd have to be the one to lead them. "We have to get to her now," Caroline said quietly, her voice steady. She took a shaky breath, looking down the dim hallway, and whispered under her breath, "Eight-armed woman, please? Help us." A faint skittering sound reached her ears. She glanced down. A thin, dark trail of gore. Spiders crept out from the cracks in the floorboards. They spread out before the group, forming a winding path down the hall, their tiny legs gleaming faintly in the dim light. Caroline gasped, and she took a steadying step forward. The others fell in step behind her, with Eli trailing at the back alongside Helen, taking over for Caroline in the role of consoling the poor woman. The spiders led them to an old wooden door at the end of the hall. Its planks were worn up and stuck out at the edges like crooked teeth. Caroline reached out, her hand brushing against the rough wood, and pushed it open. A warm gust of air swept out from behind the door, smelling like a dumpster. The door opened onto a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. The sound of Leslie's voice and another young girl's voice echoed up toward the group. "Emily," Josiah said. "That's Emily's voice." Jane hesitated beside